afternoon, everyone. Welcome on this roundtable on a delimitation. Without any further delay, I will hand over this session to our chairperson, Dr. Kelkar sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vishal. Let me first welcome all the speakers and people who have agreed to join us. I'm really grateful to you for taking this trouble. This is an attempt of Prudential Center to understand how do you first understand the challenge which is emerging, and second try to see whether we can find some sensible solutions or suggestions. So here I don't want to make any opening statement. We are here to listen to a beautiful paper prepared by Dr. Alam and Professor Palshikar. So I'll invite Professor Palshikar to speak.
Thanks, Dr. Kelkar, and thank you all. Just a couple of quick initial words of clarification and apology. The apology is for the delay. We were supposed to be doing it much earlier, but in a sense the delay was providential because the Lok Sabha elections have now taken place, and maybe we would have a calmer political environment across political parties where suggestions for delimitation might be taken on board in due course. The clarification is that we are not in a position right now to firmly say that one particular way out for this riddle would be the final one, but this is mainly to kickstart a discussion around the question of what does representation mean in the Indian context, and should we be simply bound by the mandate of one man one vote principle in terms of deciding the number of seats to be allocated to each state and so on and so forth. But before that, we plan to present very quickly the history of delimitation in India along with the architecture that is behind the process of delimitation. I must also put on record that much of the hard work for this has been put in by my colleague and friend from the CSDS, Dr. Sanjeer Alam. So he would be making the initial part of the presentation, and then maybe I will take up the remainder in the time that you have allotted to us. Thanks to PIC for allowing us enough time to work on this draft, and we look forward to inputs from both those who are present here around the table and those who may be reading the paper subsequently and giving us suggestions for revision and new ideas to look at the question of delimitation. So thank you very much, and I don't know whether you can hear, but thanks Jim particularly for making it convenient to listen to us. Look forward to your comments also. Thanks.
So, Manor, is it audible? Are you able to listen here clearly? The proceedings here?
Can hear you very clearly.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Alam, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for giving us this opportunity. We hope to immensely benefit from the discussion which is going to follow. As we know that in a system of representative democracy, delimitation of electoral constituencies is the most fundamental process towards electing a set of representatives for legislative office. In federal system, delimitation has two essential aspects. The first is the distribution of constituencies across states as well as federal units, and secondly defining or fixing boundaries of constituencies as per rules. Everywhere, the basis of delimiting constituencies is either total population or voting population. In most countries, the delimitation exercise is done in regular intervals to reflect demographic changes across states as well as constituencies. In Most of the countries where delimitation is undertaken, the period of delimitation is, the interval of delimitation is 10 years.
Which has been.
Yes, I can, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, in federal form of representation, as I noted earlier, the unit of representation is regional. Therefore, the most basic question is, what ought to be the primary basis of allocation of seats or representation to federal units and of demarcating a portion of territory as a constituency? At the normative level or theoretical level, the most popular democratic idea is the notion of equality of representation. According to this perspective, fairness of representation demands that the value of vote of citizens throughout the nation is equal, no more, no less. It implies that fair representation is ensured when federal units are allocated representation on the basis of their proportional share in country's total population or electorate, and that constituencies contain number of people, equal number of people or voters. So this has come to be known as the doctrine of one person, one vote, one value. Now let's talk about the legal and institutional framework of delimitation in India. In India, the exercise of delimitation is not only governed by a complex and nested set of rules and laws, there are also multiple institutions associated with the delimitation process. In fact, the basic rules pertaining to delimitation are laid down in the Constitution itself. For example, Article 81, Clause 2 prescribes the manner in which Lok Sabha seats have to be carved out and be distributed among federal units. Article 81, Clause 2A, states that there shall be allotted to each state a number of seats in the House of the People in such manner that the ratio between that number and the population of the state is, so far as practicable, the same for all states. Article 81 again, Clause 2B says that each state shall be divided into territorial constituencies in such a manner that the ratio between the population of each constituency and the number of seats allotted to it is, so far as practicable, the same throughout the state. Article 81, Clause 3 provides that the expression of population in that article means the population as ascertained at the last preceding census of which the relevant figures have been published. Article 82 provides for periodic readjustment of the boundaries of electoral constituencies. It says that upon the completion of a census, the allocation of seats in the House of the People to the states and the division of each state into territorial constituencies shall be readjusted by such authority in such manner as Parliament by law determine. Similarly, Article 170 deals with the size and composition of legislative assemblies and delimitation of assembly constituencies, but we are not going into that. We are basically, concerned about the delimitation associated with Lok Sabha. So, from the reading of various articles in the Constitution, it seems that there are four basic elements. One is the proportionality as the ideal for Lok Sabha seats to be allocated to states. B, total population of a state as the basis of proportionality. C, periodic revision to account for shifts in the relative population of states. And finally D, no specified method of apportion of seats in the Lok Sabha. This task is done by other institutions, which will come little later. The second institution is the Parliament. While the Indian Constitution lays down the grounding rules, it empowers the Parliament to make laws relevant to delimitation of electoral constituencies. For example, Article 327 states that Parliament may from time to time by law make provision with respect to all matters relating to or in connection with elections to either House of Parliament or either House of the Legislature of a state, including the delimitation of constituencies and all other matters necessary for securing the due constitution of such house or houses. Empowered as such by this article, the Parliament has enacted laws relating to delimitation of electoral constituencies. Of particular importance, however, is Parliament's power to set up delimitation commission to carry out the delimitation exercise. Accordingly, the delimitation acts were enacted by the Parliament in 1952, 1962 and 1972 and relatively recently 2002. The Parliament has also, brought some changes in the constitutional provisions relating to periodic revision of electoral boundaries. Through the 42nd Amendment Act 1976, it imposed a moratorium on future delimitation up until 2000. The Parliament, through the 84th Constitution Amendment Act in 2002, lifted this embargo on delimitation and paved the way for the fourth round of delimitation of electoral constituencies. But it at the same time stipulated that the readjustment of boundaries should be carried out without altering the existing strength of Lok Sabha seats and their distribution among states, as well as the total number of assembly seats in different states. Furthermore, the 84th Constitution Amendment Act once again froze future delimitation up until 2026. Parliament is also the institution which is vested with the power of either accepting or rejecting the final delimitation plan prepared by the Delimitation Commission. The third institution is Delimitation Commission. It is a nodal institution interested with the task of carrying out the whole exercise of delimitation and does the groundwork, frames guidelines, puts in place the practical details and prepare the final plan. The final plan prepared by it cannot be altered by any authority, including the Parliament. Delimitation Commission is a quasi-judicial body composed of at least a retired Supreme Court judge, the Chief Election Commissioner of India or his nominee, and the Chief Electoral Officers as ex officio members of the relevant states or union territories. Besides, the commission involves a number of members of Parliament as associate members, although their role is quite advisory. Unlike in the USA, in India the judiciary has little role to play in the delimitation exercise, as the entire plan enjoys judicial immunity. Article 329 provides that the validity of any law relating to the delimitation of constituencies or the allotment of seats made or purported to be made under Article 327 or Article 328 shall not be questioned in any court of law. However, it is important to note that the legal architecture undergirding delimitation of constituencies is not merely confined to Article 327 of the Constitution, but several other articles therein. In other words, Article 329 itself does not entirely occlude the scope of judicial review, but so far, even Supreme Court has not interfered with the delimitation process. Now, delimitation in practice.
One clarificatory question.
Yeah.
That when you say that judiciary has no role to play, unlike the USA, you mentioned unlike USA, you are saying that in USA the gerrymandering can be objected to and taken to the Supreme Court, which you can't do in India. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just clarify.
So in USA, the Supreme Court is the final authority to accept the delimitation plan. So now delimitation in practice. So first 3 rounds of delimitation held regularly just after decennial census and revisited allocation of seats to federal units and readjusted constituency boundaries. they followed the same principles and criteria for allocating seats and defining constituency boundaries. For example, the third round of delimitation. Prior to the third round of delimitation, more data, more information was not available. So it was a kind of opaque exercise. So in the third round of delimitation, which took place in 1972-76, the method it adopted was as follows. Out of 542 Lok Sabha seats, the Delimitation Commission allotted 35 seats to the smaller states and union territories, following the principle that every federal unit should have representation in the Lok Sabha. The remaining 507 seats were distributed across the large state, which were 15 in number at the time, based on their proportional share in the combined total population. As a result, we can see in this table that the population to representative ratio across the country, across major states.
Can we have the next slide, please?
Yes, this one. So we can see that when it was done in 1976, we can see that there were little variations across states. So the quota was, per constituency was 10 lakh something. So the maximum variation was by 30,000 population. Similarly, the variations at the level of assembly constituencies were very small. But after that, this third round of delimitation, as I mentioned, the 42nd Constitution Amendment Act brought the constitutionally mandated periodic delimitation to a halt. By a proviso to Article 82 as well as Article 172, the amendment froze the population figure to that of the 1971 census and deferred further delimitation as well as reallocation of seats among the states until 2000. This was said to be done in pursuance of the goal of population control, as the then government appeared to be serious about combating the menace of rapidly growing population. Whatever may be the case. But the fourth round of delimitation, when the fourth round of delimitation took place on the basis of 2000 population, reapportionment of Lok Sabha seat was not done. It was done only within the state to equalize constituencies. Instead, it was suspended for another 3 decades through the 87 Amendment Act in 2003. So now genesis of the problem.
Sorry, one more clarification. So that means we have completed 4 delimitation exercises so far.
1 partial and 3 full.
Okay. Because you mentioned earlier 3, but it should be actually 4.
4th.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
4th one is partial because it was not involved in reallocation of seats across the states. So freezing of delimitation for many decades has given rise to 2 problems relating to representation. The first is the rising population to representative ratio. For example, the average population of Lok Sabha constituency, or what we call PRR, was 10.4 lakh in 1971, which rose to 18.9 lakh in 2000. But by 2031, it is projected to be 27 lakh. With this, India is the only democracy in the world to have such a large, PRR, or population to representative ratio. The second problem, which is the most important one, is widening disparity in PRR, population to representative ratio, across states as a result of differential rates of population growth. While the southern region drastically reduced population growth rate, the northern and eastern regions failed to do so, leading to over-representation of the former and under-representation of the later. Yeah.
PRR is population to what ratio?
Representative ratio. The number of people per Member of Parliament. Seat. So we can see that in the fourth round of delimitation, the variations, were quite large. For example, in Kerala, per seat population was, 16% less than the national quota. On the other hand, per constituency, Lok Sabha seat population was, 19%, more than the national quota. Similarly, Tamil Nadu had also per seat population much less than the national quota. But the deviation was, quite glaring at the for the smaller states. For example, you can see that Goa has much less, per seat population from the national average is deviated by, 64% almost. For Andaman Nicobar, the deviation was 81%, Chandigarh 52%, Dadra and Nagar Haveli 88%. So we can see that the problem has been, no, please.
No, when you say minus, I hope you mean the other way. See, if the Kerala has seats where the representation is more than the national average, 18.9, if it does, then it's an under-representation. Ultani, in Goa, if one seat is only representing 5 lakhs, it's an advantage, not a disadvantage.
No,
it's
so
just a mathematical calculation.
I know, but
No.
when you put when you say
the
negative,
minus figure shows, our representation. Because
Correct, yeah.
And plus sign shows, underrepresentation.
but over-representation in a political system is actually an advantage to that state. Their vote in parliament has a disproportionate influence in the discussions. If I am from Arunachal and I only have 1 or 2 lakh people and 1 MP, my 1 MP is more powerful in terms of influence. So the negative.
Yeah, if the basis is, population.
So I'm just confused by the
Okay.
negative and positive
Yeah.
signs. Thank you, sir.
So as soon as the process of the fourth round of delimitation began, the political class from the southern states, expressed its concern and opposed reallocation of seats on the basis of population figures of 2001 census, as it would cause the southern states significant loss of representation. The argument was that it would alter the existing regional balance of power, that the southern states would have their voice curtailed in the Lok Sabha, and that it would weaken the federal structure. The anxieties of loss of seats were not misplaced. For example, if reallocation of Lok Sabha seats were to be done in the next delimitation on the basis of 2001 population and keeping the total number of seats available to large states the same, that is, 507, Tamil Nadu would lose 7 seats, Kerala 4, Andhra Pradesh 3, and Karnataka 1. On the other hand, Uttar Pradesh and Rajasthan would have gained, 5 and 4 seats respectively. Bihar and Madhya Pradesh would have received 3 extra seats each. A simmering political clamor, then forced the union government to introduce the 84th and 87th Amendment Acts. Together, the two acts clarified that the total number of existing seats as allocated to various states in the Lok Sabha on the basis of 1971 census shall remain unaltered till the first census to be taken after 2026. So if so we have done some exercise. If a fresh allocation of Lok Sabha seats to 2 federal units is done on the basis of population figures of next census, assuming that it will be completed before or by 2026, the year that marks an end to the moratorium on delimitation, by keeping the current strength of Lok Sabha unchanged, it will drastically reshape representation of regions. Based on the projected population for 2026, 5 southern states taken together will lose as many as 24 seats, a loss of nearly 1/5 of seats they currently have. Kerala runs the risk of losing about 1/3 of Lok Sabha seats. it currently has. It will come down from 20 to 14. In relative terms, the share of 5 southern states in the Lok Sabha will decline by 5 percentage points from 23.8% at present to 19.3% in the next delimitation. In contrast, for northern states, UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, and MP together will add 34 seats to their kitty. At the time for the fifth round of delimitation is fast approaching, the constitutional and political tensions are once again likely to structure the delimitation process. In fact, the political class of the southern states has already raised its voice against fresh redistribution of Lok Sabha seats. It is important to note that southern states are distinguishable from the rest part of India, not just demographically but also culturally and economically, and also in terms of political alignment. So this was the problem, and I think Professor Palshikar will deal with the possible solutions to this problem.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I will need your PPT in any case.
Thank you, Dr. Alam. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, please.
So, thank you, Dr. Alam, very comprehensive, very informative. But when you say towards the end that if principle of proportionality is applied, then so and so stands to gain or lose, you purely mean in terms of mathematical.
Mathematical,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
So, the number of seats.
Yeah,
not
number
in any other way.
of seats.
Not in any other way.
Yeah, only number of seats. So that is the principle of proportionality is seen as on the fair principle of distribution of seats across federal units.
Just
But-
one
but-
question. Say in USA,
Yeah.
the number of seats in House of Representatives has been frozen at 435 since 1929, when the population of USA was 12 crores. Now it is about 34 crores. So there, if the number of seats, they are having the delimitation exercise.
Yeah.
So there, how does this PRR, say once we say ki India is the only big democracy where
Yeah.
you have such a year. So how do we explain whether in
Yeah.
terms of functioning of the parliament there or in terms of the efficacy of the MPs or the congressmen who are working?
Yeah, I think there are two parts to this question. One is about the number itself. So initially, in the US, there was a provision that there would be one representative to every 30,000 population. Again, it increased. But delimitation takes place regularly. So the Congress decides that, look, this is the number of seats and this is the population of the census. So how to distribute the seats to different, states. So it is always on the basis of the proportional
But
share
the
of
total
population.
number-
Total number remains there. So this exercise assumes that if the total number remains same and the population becomes the basis of redistribution of seats, then what will happen to different states?
That is in that table.
Yeah, yeah.
Just one more point that you said, if you apply the principle of proportionality, then some states will lose, some states will gain,
Okay.
right? But this is what you're predicting, but the fact is already, we've had a huge deviation from the principle. The principle of proportionality doesn't hold anyway because of the wide
Yeah,
variation.
that is our argument that
So we have, what I'm saying,
so-
what I'm
so-
trying to say is we have abandoned the principle of proportionality already for last 20, 30 years.
yeah,
So it's not as if we are going to stick to it or not stick to it, de facto or de jure or whatever.
that
We
was
have-
the only reason for which redistribution of seats across states
Well, I
were
know,
not.
for various
Yeah.
reasons,
Yeah.
if we were going to, the prediction is that if we stick to principle of proportionality, some states will lose, some states will
Gain.
But that
Yeah.
makes it sound as if we have been trying to, we abandoned the principle of proportionality long time ago.
50 years.
50 years.
50 years.
Yeah, so there's no
76.
point saying that let's stick to this principle which is non-existent in a way of application.
Okay, I have an answer. I will answer you later on.
Yeah, thanks. Can we move to the next slide, please? Though it doesn't involve many numbers now. The questions that we need to address now, as you were pointing out, are how can the tension between maintaining the current regional balance of representation or power, whatever way you look at it, and meeting the ideal constitutional mandate of one man, one vote, one value principle. You pointed out, for example, that for last half century, we have already abandoned that. But the principle is there in the constitution, and therefore the tension in principle is there that constitutionally there is something that has been violated for half a century. Secondly, are there possible ways of correcting growing representational anomaly by accommodating concerns of the states? Because on the other hand, there are concerns of the states, both states of North India or states of South India, likely to be negatively affected, or North Indian states can say that they are currently being negatively affected because they have underrepresentation. And finally, what could be the best option to negotiate with conflicting positions and claims around redistribution of Lok Sabha seats? Because finally, the position that one would need to take is whether we are going to strictly adhere to the constitutional mandate, or is there going to be a negotiated settlement. Let us first look at the possible spectrum of solutions, starting with the strict adherence to the constitutional provision. That is at one extreme. To privilege the principle of one equal vote, or one person, one vote, one value, as the basis of reallocation of seats. In other words, the argument could be that let the states get as many seats as their population warrants. If therefore states of North India get more seats and states of South India get less seats, there is nothing unfair in terms of this principle and also in terms of the constitutional provision. This position is not only in line with constitutional provision but also consistent with the idea of representation, if one believes that representation has to be proportionate to population size of a given unit. But the downside of it is that it has little regard for the legitimate concerns of those states which will lose in numbers terms, not in terms of justice principle, because they have curbed their population growth. In a sense, the usual argument which we are always accustomed to is better performing states seem to be losers in certain respects, whether in terms of representation or in terms of financial allocations, etc. Yeah.
Small technical objection is that when you say the strict constitutional principle of representing the region based on its population, the word population is not without its own instability. When we say population of so and so region, we assume that there is actually a static number. In a country with 3 or 400 million migrants, when they spend 11 months of the year in Bombay but are voting in their home village, the population on that village, that word doesn't have as much sanctity as the proposition seems to imply. Whether that person who's spending maybe 10 months of the year in Bombay should be counted in the population of Bombay or in the population of his home state in
Fair enough.
So therefore the word population itself has to be understood.
Yes.
Here. Okay.
I mean, we can come to this more general issue at the end, perhaps in the round of discussion also.
I mean, the larger point from my economics point of view is that in the presence of so many rigidities in terms of labor laws or so many other, we still are in a control rush. The one escape clause is the labor mobility. The mobility of labor is the great India's response to various kind of constraints. And that has resulted in a situation that our country has so many internal migrants.
Yeah.
Very large number.
Sure.
And seasonal.
I was just wondering, because given the census exercise that it happens on a particular day, or you count heads on a particular day, technically speaking, migrants should be counted as residents of that state on that particular day. Technically, though we know that in practice it might happen, it might not happen, and therefore there would always be some slippages from this basic principle in which it
I'm
operates.
saying India is particular outlier because the response in terms of migration for a less developed country like ours is actually, according to me, a response to other rigidities. and that's a great, actually it's a great market reaction. But the fact is that we are a country with a very large proportion of migrants.
Yes.
Just one point in the migration thing. So normally that when we calculate this the migration or account for this the migration, so normally that so in India that we have a tradition of giving birth, like females goes to their the paternal house.
Yeah.
So if child is born over there, and if so obviously it goes to his paternal house, then that child is counted as a migrant. So by birth. So again that is a misleading number. So that is another dimension when we calculate this the migration. So this is not considered while considering this the migration. Otherwise by birth that you consider. So for example, if I am born in say Solapur, but I am living, so my maternal house is in Solapur, so I will be considered as a migrant, even though my father is staying in say Pune. So that is the problem of calculating this.
Census itself, there are 2-3 questions, linked question. How to ascertain whether somebody is a migrant or not. So we need to look at that too.
But this is beyond the definition of census. I'm just saying
Yeah,
that I'm going to the principle of representation in the constitution, and you said it follows that it has to be based on population. I'm just cautioning that the word population is an unstable concept with the reality of migration.
That's why a number of countries have shifted to voters list, the total number of voters. So it's the voting population of not the.
Even then there would be a problem.
There will be a problem.
Because many people have complained that migrants are not included in electoral rolls where they are actually working. Whereas at the same time we know that the law provides that if I am working here and want to register myself here as an elector, I am entitled to do so. So it's in a way both the processes of migration on the one hand and the way in which the administration of electoral rolls or population count actually happen on the ground. Yeah. So one way of looking at the entire problem would be simply to say that there is a constitutional provision and you have to follow that provision, period. The escape route on the other hand would be to say, as some people have been saying, and that would be another extreme position, that in order to maintain a balance, let there be a freeze. Let us just not tinker with it. Whatever, as you said, has happened for last 50 years, let that be. In 1976, we froze the current, let's say, number of seats in the Lok Sabha and said that let us not tinker with the strength of states. In 2002-04, again the same was done. So if the same is now continued, it could simply, in a sense, bottle the entire controversy for another 25 years, because it has been done for 25 years every time. This position is favored by particularly states of the south that are facing the spectre of losing their representation in the Lok Sabha. It could be criticized that this proposal has little regard for the idea of equality of population as the basis of redistribution of states. It would also require another amendment, that is another point, but that is not a great point, because either way, whatever solutions you come across, amendments will be inevitable. Incidentally, before we move ahead and reject the idea of freezing, let us also not forget that the principle of the federal principle, that is to say, recognizing that states have a role in this entire process of delimitation as stakeholders, has already been recognized and practiced in the delimitation process. As Sanjeer Bhai pointed out earlier, smaller states were already given a recognition saying that however small your population may be, you are still entitled to one representative at least in the Lok Sabha. Now that decision, which was taken by the third delimitation commission, implicitly recognizes that states are an important stakeholder or player in this entire game of deciding the strength. He would probably be able to throw more light later on if required, and we can do more work on this as well. But this idea that distribution of seats among federal units is an important principle has also been recognized elsewhere. So it is not something only new and only for India that one is talking about. And therefore, either the idea of freeze or some idea of a compromise need to be taken on board for consideration. Frankly, when we started working on this, I was more inclined towards this proposal of just freezing the genie in the bottle. Dr. Sanjeer Alam pushed me, saying that this will not resolve the problem permanently, and therefore we need to find out some solutions. And that's why then we started looking at various other studies and come up with a proposal. So let us move on to the next one. A middle of the road option. Next. One middle of the road solution that has been making round, and we don't claim any originality about this because this is implicit in the earlier work by Alistair Macmillan also, is to expand the size of Lok Sabha to the extent that no state loses any seat. If the number of Lok Sabha seats is increased to roughly around 800 and the number of seats allotted to smaller states and union territories remains the same as it stands today, that is 41, then the remaining 759 seats are distributed to the remaining states, and then you can revisit by reducing the population representative ratio, PRR. That's the exercise which has been done to show how no state will lose any seats, but some states will still stand to gain in terms of seats. That's the table.
It's an illusion, no? You're diluting them anyway.
I wouldn't call it illusion, because in politics, when you are making compromises, there has to be some middle path. You cannot simply say that, therefore, logically speaking, let us go by the constitutional provision. And maybe we will come to that again later in the round of discussion. But when the constitution was, this principle was envisioned, that population would be the basis, neither the question of migration that you pointed out, nor the question of population imbalance becoming more aggravated because of different trajectories of population growth in different states was probably visualized. Because one is talking of 1947-48, when the makers of the constitution obviously laid down the principle without getting into the nitty-gritty as to whether some states in future will curb their population growth faster than some other states. This entire idea of states that are lagging behind, or the Bimaru states, is a late discovery. Our policymakers realized much later that there are some states which, for variety of reasons, one need not blame the states, one need not blame their rulers either, but there are certain reasons why certain states would lag behind in development. The same can be true equally of levels of literacy and therefore levels of population growth or rates of population growth in different states.
Just to little bit of nitpicking, the principle of one person, one vote was adopted and enshrined irrespective of whether that person was illiterate or not illiterate, backward or not backward, whichever religion. So over a period of time, if the evolution shows Bimaru states, non-Bimaru states, economic backwardness or not, that principle never referred to any other condition of the human being.
Sure.
Yeah, there was no qualification.
So therefore, even if some people were more enlightened, they controlled their growth rates or not, they did economically much better. I mean, that principle never made any appeal to, we were assuming everybody will grow uniformly. So that.
There are two meanings of one person, one vote involved here. One is that if you have a certain level of education and I have a very low level of education, we would both still be entitled to have vote. The other meaning which is pertinent here is when population is taken into account for a particular state, roughly the PRR across states should be uniform as far as possible. That is the meaning of one person, one vote, one value when we are counting the PRR. Currently what happens is that because of this 50-year moratorium, larger states have a higher PRR, and that's why, as you were pointing out, underrepresentation, and low growth states have a lower PRR, therefore a higher representation.
There is an inherent tension between the two.
Yes.
The two being one person, one vote, which is like a principle of an individual right, recognizing the primacy of the individual, which is a very great enlightened, value. And then at the same time you said collective choice.
Yeah, there
That
at the state level.
So when you say the one person, one person, one vote is a value statement of the right, the right of the individual. The supreme person is the individual, and then you say the collective has the. So थोडक्यात म्हणजे झुंडशाही versus individual.
Not exactly, no.
The right
I mean,
of
the
a group.
tension, I would consider your point about tension, yes.
There is a tension between these two values.
But I would formulate that tension not rather as between a crowd or a mob and an individual, but between individual as a citizen on the one hand and states as equal stakeholders in the national political system. And that's why we are actually moving when we propose that we support this idea that let us recognize that in this game of how many seats which state gets, just as citizens have a certain stake, because then my value comes down. As you were pointing out, in Arunachal, my value as a citizen is much higher in Lok Sabha, whereas in UP my value as a citizen is much lower. Fair enough. At the same time, the Constitution of India has created these units, and therefore these units also need to be recognized as equal stakeholders in this game of value or power in the composition of the Lok Sabha. On the one hand, the criticism against this could be that the Constitution doesn't mention that in its provision for representation. Our argument would be, yes, the Constitution doesn't mention it in the case of representation in Lok Sabha, for example, but otherwise the Constitution does recognize that these are units of the Union of India, and you cannot imagine Union of India without these. But maybe we'll come back to this tension, because obviously whatever solution you follow, a tension is bound to be there, whether it is the free solution or the increase of number of seats in the Lok Sabha. Currently we are saying that this is a middle path, by which we are saying that look, no state is losing, because after 50 years of a certain strength in Lok Sabha, if a state loses seats, then both its self-esteem as a state, but also as a player in the game of power in the Lok Sabha, that state stands to lose. And therefore we need to protect against that.
So since this discussion is in a way on the foundation of federalism,
yes,
so then I'd like to make a meta statement, which please, it's out of context, but I think, so the meta solution, since it involves compromises and reducing this tension, the meta approach should be that let us reduce the premium on centralized power. The whole scramble for getting a seat in parliament is because they exercise such disproportionate power on our life, when in fact I would rather have the power devolved to my mayor. And
I don't think I would agree with that, because even if the parliament were to be entirely powerless, to the extent that it is a spectacle of national body of representatives, I wouldn't like my state to get reduced from what it has been for last 50 years. So there would still be a symbolic, let's say, premium on how much do I get in the parliament. But yes, there are solutions, and we will come to that as you are suggesting, as can we move away from representation and look at some other solutions.
Yes. In terms of devolution, this is the
Yeah,
whole
the devolution
73rd
argument.
amendment, 72nd,
Yeah.
that because there is so much premium, and therefore I want a seat there. The spectacle and image and the symbolic value is well taken. But if most of my life is affected by decisions taken by my local representatives, I'm not compromising on the representational principle of democracy, but democracy operates on 3 levels. So just, the devolution of power to the lowest level, which is of course another agenda there. Okay, thanks.
Anyway, let's move on, and let's move to the limits of this Lok Sabha expansion also. This proposal only partly helps resolve the issue. It fails to address the hard issue of widening the power asymmetry among states or across states. In any case, that still will remain unaddressed. And therefore, critics could say that if mere retaining existing number of states or getting disproportionately less than more populous states will satisfy the southern states. So on the one hand, this is the criticism therefore would be that this solution would neither satisfy the south nor satisfy the north, because the north will say that we are losers vis-a-vis the southern states because they are retaining their strength, whereas they should be losing. However, such a proposal is worth considering because it is not only sensitive to political concerns but also enriches the meaning of what is democratic representation. So in a sense, we anticipated this point in our previous exchanges, that in a sense this proposal goes beyond the mere question of equal vote or equality of vote and introduces the principle of federalism into the consideration of how should we have the architecture of our Lok Sabha designed. Then we come to the second middle of the road option, which is to shift the focus onto the Rajya Sabha. Leave aside the Lok Sabha, leave the Lok Sabha to the existing constitutional provision perhaps, or leave the Lok Sabha frozen in its strength, and let the distribution of Lok Sabha seats not be the final word, but restructure the Rajya Sabha in such a manner that it compensates the states for the loss of representation in the Lok Sabha. There could be two ways of doing it. One is to devise a suitable scheme of weightage combining demographic and non-demographic attributes and thus give states more representation in the Rajya Sabha, or the other way would be to equalize the number of RS seats, Rajya Sabha seats. Currently in our Rajya Sabha also there is a proportionality to population, whereas if instead we say that 5 from each state, that would in a sense bring all states on par, and thus some southern states would get some extra leeway in the functioning of the Rajya Sabha.
But to ensure that Rajya Sabha is meaningfully,
Yes.
Because a lot of bills have been passed by bypassing the Rajya Sabha.
Yes. The real problem with this proposal would obviously be, on the one hand, it would require a drastic reconstruction of the entire scheme of things. First, you change the principle of representation in the Rajya Sabha. Then, as you were rightly pointing out, we need to empower the Rajya Sabha with either equal powers with the Lok Sabha, or maybe like the Senate in the US, in some cases more powers than the Lok Sabha. Only then perhaps it could be done. In other words, the point simply is that consider an amendment which would be required for our compromise proposal. That is to say, expand the Lok Sabha and retain the strength of the current strength of the smaller states or southern states. For that, a limited nature of amendment would be required, whereas what we are now talking about would actually be something virtually rewriting the Constitution of India in major parts of its details. That's the major problem. A third, and this is only academic, a mix of these two can be considered. That is to say, on the one hand, expand the Lok Sabha, but also on the other hand, try to restructure the Rajya Sabha wherever possible, at least in terms of equality of number of seats for the states in the Rajya Sabha. If these two are combined, then perhaps two things will happen. One is, we would already have introduced the federal principle in the scheme of things, and secondly, we would have set up a platform for compromise across the states, and that is actually the concluding point that we make. What we are saying in conclusion, therefore, and we have anticipated much of the criticisms in our earlier conversation, that frequent postponement of delimitation might not be a very advisable idea, delimitation in the fuller sense. We are also arguing that with the problem, while the problem has reached a point where redistribution of states cannot be delayed further, the anomaly has to be addressed. The anomaly that some states will lose, not the anomaly in numbers, but the anomaly that some states stand to lose, and therefore to recognize that it is a politically contentious issue. It is not simply a legal constitutional issue by arguing that look, there is a provision in the constitution, let's follow it. It is also a politically contentious issue, and that would require many ways of out of box discussions. Thirdly, we also suggest that while regular delimitation is necessary, it needs to be designed differently from what is so far practiced. What are we then saying? We are saying that we need to expand the idea of democratic representation. The idea of democratic representation, as traditionally understood in the process of delimitation, was confined to what we were earlier discussing as population, and therefore equality of votes. Any solution to this complicated problem has to begin by accepting that it is not merely a question of some states losing or some states gaining, nor is this a transient issue of differential population growth, because imagine 100 years later population growth trajectories are somewhat equalized across states. Would that satisfy? Our answer would be that we need to reconsider the underlying principle, and that underlying principle of the process of delimitation needs to be understood both in terms of equality of vote and federal asymmetry. That India has smaller states, larger states, and so on and so forth. The inclusion of the federal dimension needs to be thus included or considered as a second step in the reimagination of delimitation. Once we have done that, we argue that we would have made the progress in the form or direction of more acceptable, more democratic, and probably more accommodative process of deciding delimitation. So, in conclusion, we are arguing that it is not merely a question of logical and legalistic interpretation of what delimitation constitutes, but an opportunity to include the federal idea and provide a platform for larger or wider cross-state compromises and negotiations. We are aware that this is not adequate. In the sense, as we discussed earlier, any proposal is bound to have objections from one set of states or both set of states, and therefore in a sense it's a question of political negotiation, and that political negotiation that political negotiation seems to be rather complicated in current political context of the country. So the real roadblock is not ideas. The real roadblock is not thinking new ideas, but the possibility that the 2 or 3 major political blocks that exist in the country today, the ruling bloc and the 2 or other whatever number of opposition blocks, will have to come on board to discuss and negotiate. It's not a north-south question either. It's not only a question of BJP getting more seats in north, because in the future the BJP will get seats in the south as well. In a sense, therefore, it is not merely a question of BJP versus others. We don't see that as a BJP versus others question, because as the BJP starts making inroads in east and south, in a sense that is neutralized, that issue is neutralized, and what you have then is purely different states having different expectations from representation in the Lok Sabha. But anyway, we shall stop here and maybe have more comments, and then we can go back to our responses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now can we go to start with?
Yeah, just to
Maybe we can ask Jim first.
James, do you have any comments? James, do you have any comments, questions, suggestions at this stage? You have to unmute the professor. Thank you.
I'm having trouble with my mute button. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I don't have a lot of big questions now. I would say, am I correct in thinking that Professor Palshikar said that you will need a constitutional amendment for any change that you make, or would it be possible simply to avoid the need for a new constitutional amendment by redistributing the seats from south to north, basically? I'm not sure whether you always need a constitutional amendment. I also wondered if you're trying to persuade people of this new view that Professor Palshikar was just explaining, reconsidering the basic the notion of democratic representation. If today, and I don't know what the answer to this is, if today some small states, have more seats in the Lok Sabha than big states, per capita, then there's already an imbalance there, which might be used to show that this revised notion of democratic representation, in a way, is not such a new idea because you already have a kind of imbalance. Finally, I would just quickly say I doubt that you would make much progress if you tried to solve the problem by enlarging or empowering the Rajya Sabha. I think that would be such a big change that it would be shot down by people, and so I think that second middle of the road option is very unlikely to be of use. Maybe the first one has more promise, but I'll stop there at this point.
Thank you.
Just a small comment, because I've been jumping in. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me. Two comments at the end. One is that we made a reference to migration. So in your discussion, you did not come back. I thought you will come back to the fact that while the principle is important, we also need to recognize the reality of migration in India, I think, which in my mind is more than many other countries, and it's a large country. And the second point I wanted to flag is that whether you consider this as related or completely unrelated to your solution or the issue that you're looking at, namely the breaking up of larger states into smaller states. That it is a prerogative of the Union of, the Union of India, I guess, the government. We did create 2 or 3 smaller states. So whether that has any bearing on this issue at all. Okay.
So here, first to what Dr. Ranade mentioned, that this issue of disproportional political weightage to different states. Say if the larger states which intend to or which are projected to gain, if they are broken up into smaller states, will that alter the situation? Say then almost all states have between 20 to 40 seats, in that range. There's no one state which has 85 or 90 or odd states. So how does that factor in, or will that change the solutions that we have in mind? The second issue is that we are talking of federal system. In the federal system now, local government is very much a part of that. But because the Constitution, when it was framed, it dealt more with central and state government, and local government was reduced to just 243, Article 243, and then left to the states. If we recognize local government as the third tier of Indian system which is in place, and especially if we are looking at democracy and federalism as the key that is the these large number of rural and urban local bodies with the large number of representatives that they have, they are the key to providing better constituency services to citizens than either MPs or MLAs. Then how does that sort of impact the suggestion that we have? Because to my mind, now local government will be a part of the basic structure of the Constitution. If at all it is to be adjudicated upon, I think no court and no political party would be in a position to wish them away. Just given their numbers that they are there and the way they have come up over the last 30 years. More so politically than economically or administratively. So that is one. The second thing is that the constituency services that we are, say if an MP or MLA, whether he represents 10 lakh or 15 lakh or 20 lakhs or 27 lakh, what difference does it make to the role that he is expected to play in parliament? Does that have any bearing whether on the questions that he arises? Because say if he raises the issue of his constituency, the reply would be that this is a state subject. We will obtain the reply from the state government and will pass it on to you. That is the standard reply that we give in parliament. So it's not going to be a factor where the local issues regarding his constituents, whether all of them can be raised and debated in parliament, because then the state and central and all those issues will come up. So by having more number of representatives, is it going to in any way improve the functioning of parliament or state assembly? That is also something which we should be asking. Third, from the citizens' point of view, what benefit will it bring to him if there are more MPs or MLAs? Because right now we will be having about 5,000 MPs and MLAs altogether, whereas there are more than 33 lakhs local body representatives. So if 33 lakh cannot do, these 5,000 or 7,000 or 6,000 at best, what change will it bring about if you look at it from the citizens' point of view? So to my mind, I think these are also certain questions that we need to look at.
I was one or two clarificatory things that in the constitutional provisions that were quoted, there is that thing called so far as practicable. Now, how much can we now, how do we interpret that to move away legally? We have already done that, as Ajit has been pointing out, etc. is a different matter. That's a matter of practicality or what has happened. But even whilst trying to go back and trying to have some kind of underlying principles intact, can we have some leeway in that particular phrase is one. The second is, to me, maybe that is just the way my nature is, kick the ball down a little bit. And that would be the simplest to do, and probably that's what will happen. I agree that permanently we will not be able to solve this problem. But since I noted this, it has worked for 50 years, things change. India is still evolving. It has changed its political structure and everything. So, and this kick the ball further down has a slight nuance. It's not as completely stupid as it may sound, in the sense that even thinking logically and so on, if things have not gone completely wrong or haywire after all these deviations, why not freeze what we have now, rather trying to do the reparation work, right, going back to that one vote, one person kind of a thing, and freeze this value as the basis, and going further, or maybe, you see what I mean, that change the values and take these as a working kind of a thing to reach some kind of a new scenario. The third thing is about the smaller states, that I think independently of this, I have a slight favor for, whether it's in terms of better management, better whatever. Because some of the states are becoming too large. I mean, Maharashtra, for example, becoming very complex and very big, comparable to in terms of its economy and looked at from that point of view, almost comparable to the top 30th or 25th country in the world. Now, to have that, so that could be one. Um, if we try to look at it completely from principles and ideal point of view as academics that we are, would tend to do, then the ideal thing would be if we had empowerment, and Sunil Kumar talked about that in terms of numbers, and whilst I agree with it, I am not so sanguine about it happening quickly. It certainly hasn't happened up till now because of various reasons, mainly what I call as the legacy overhang. That most of the third tier governments, we don't even call them governments. We call them local bodies, we call them self-government, which is the provincial hang. And then in Maharashtra in particular, whenever one tries to tell them about the constitutional validity post 74th, I am told, Arey, but we already had it from Yashwantrao's time. What you had from Yashwantrao's time was not that. What you had were creatures of the state. And that continues to be the mindset. So I'm not very sanguine. Ideally, if we had that, then yes. But that links to a more fundamental thing, that when you talked of the constitution makers, you remember that we were never at that time at least thinking of a federal system in the sense of the United States. We were a union of states with centripetal bias, advisedly. If things have changed, then that has to change. And we have been working of late trying to see what are the contours and how do we move now to cooperative federalism in the future. Difficult, but that has to happen. It will happen. We are evolving, as I keep on saying. I'm not trying to be cynical or negative about it, but these are difficult things to work on. So the idea of federalism, for example, states having greater power or whatever, like they probably have in the United States compared to what Indians have. Now working at it, it's the same guys who will have to work at it, all of these political people. Two other things, and then I have 2-3 more if I can continue.
Please.
One is the idea of migration. I think we need to think about it more seriously with all its complications. We need to think about this migration bit. We also, and that is because I think I'm an economist, so-called, so some kind of a side study if you have done as to what has this imbalance led to in terms of economic and developmental conditions of the citizens. That has the higher representation meant that they have been better off either in terms of economics or whatever? Might be an interesting thing to look at. I suspect not. It is actually the people who have done well, the southern states, Gujarat, Maharashtra and all these, which of course gets reflected in the other discussions that we have. Then you have a committee of empowered finance ministers. There is a ganging up and discussions in the corridor of all these finance ministers, the Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh included there and so on, saying that, hey, what the hell, these guys are not doing well, they are lazy and उनको आप ज़्यादा दे रहे हो और हम काम कर रहे हैं तो हमको नहीं दे रहे हो, under the only constitutional way in which funds can flow now, which is the Finance Commission. So that might be an interesting side study that one could do, at least in the appendix, so we could simply do it, although I think I pretty much know what it's going to be like. The Rajya Sabha, it looks theoretically interesting, the bicameral stuff and everything, but just like the third tier government, the more I think about it, what would be required in order to enforce the real power to Rajya Sabha, especially with the chicanery that we see. I mean, the money bill being done in the Lok Sabha, once that was done and upheld by the Supreme Court, as somebody was telling me, all this business of Rajya Sabha being empowered, etc., goes out of the window. You can always find enough ingenuity to get everything done through the parliament now. So that is there. So all this then leads me to the couple of things. One is, to me, it will have to be a negotiated solution, politically negotiated solution. Logic and pure theory, etc., one can work out complicated models and one can do something about it. I don't think that's going to work. Ultimately, the real politic and the negotiation will have to be done. The question is, can we now start thinking in terms of negotiations, in terms of not numbers finally, but principles, the underlying principles on which we can negotiate. Can we learn something from GST Council, however badly it may be functioning? The fact that so many guys are coming here and so on, undoubtedly, I don't know how many states, and there would be strategies that would be coming about and so on. But the idea that we need to messily, however messily, push forward, without that we don't close, that there is no option of just continuous procrastination. You will have to come to some kind of a decision, something like that. And we have not done as badly as some of us would want, because our expectations are high, I think. They have been able to negotiate amongst each other and do a lot of things. Much more can be done, but what I'm saying is something like that. Can we learn something from that when we are negotiating? Number two is, for example, and here structurally when I'm thinking of delimitation, sir, there is another problem that you had talked to me about long ago, which as a mathematical person, that's my basic training, structurally it is similar to the problem of IMF, where the voting rights are going to be, need to be kind of allocated again, reallocated, because of the changed circumstances and newer countries becoming more important and so on. Now, one of the principles there that probably you can start off on negotiations would be that don't give veto power to either some state, because one of the things here is going to be, apart from what really does it matter if there are 50 people, what do they really deliver to the citizens of that state? Apart from that, really maybe realistic, but keeping that aside, the real fear is UP and Bihar, for example, tomorrow would be in a position to literally kind of push everything through in India. Now, can we now say that that cannot be allowed? Now, that depends again on not the individual citizens, but identity as states. How strong is the identity of a state for me? Now, if you have smaller states, then now can we now think in terms of where coalitions can be formed? That would be of small coalitions. They can be formed of two or three states. That would take care of all the decisions in the parliament. That cannot be allowed to happen. Something like that. So if we can think in terms of negotiation principles, then we might be able to reach some numbers of people, representatives and so on as an outcome. It might be wrong to, although again as an arithmetic or mathematical person, I would like to tinker and say, okay, let me build a model and say 10% increase here dete hain, 10% decrease dete hain. One of the solutions, which for me is a corner solution, is to say that you don't lose anything, but actually you are losing, because as a proportion you are diminished. So only in terms of optical numbers you are retaining. But you can play around the numbers. it would be a false start to think in terms of numbers as a starting point. Let that emerge as an outcome. Let us negotiate on basic minimum principles on the basis of which there could be negotiations, and then the states will have to politically negotiate, and we leave it at that till they bring that, let the status quo continue. That is the kind of a solution that I can think of just now, but it's just very raw kind of thinking.
Thank you. I think we have now Professor Arora and Professor Lalwani also, Mala and Balveer Sahab. You want to say anything at this stage?
He wants to leave, so.
No, sir, nothing at the moment.
Okay, Professor Arora?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I must compliment Professor Palshikar and the paper writer for a very bold statement on what the needs of the hour are. I think they have assessed it very well, and it is encouraging to see the consensus around the fact that it is not only a question of democratic representation, but also federal representation. That we are dealing with the problems of delimitation of a federal democracy. I think on that there is broad consensus. Where we have struck some rocks is how to achieve this. And as Jim said, constitutional amendment is a rocky path, and the building of a consensus is again uncertain. Just now the question of how decisions are arrived at in the GST Council was raised, that it is possible to arrive at some decision. So my suggestion here and my question for your response is, would it help if the Interstate Council under Article 263 is pressed into service to try and hammer out a consensus, a solution to this problem, because it is a body that exists precisely for resolving such contentious issues in a concerted manner. So that is what I wanted to suggest, that we need to look at ways in which, since the Team India concept is not working, why not go down the statutory path of the Interstate Council, Article 263, and press for it to be used for this purpose.
Thank you. I have
Ujjwal Kumar Singh.
Oh, sorry. Dr. Ujjwal Singh, would you like to add at this stage?
No, unfortunately I joined very late, so I won't be able to add anything. But I've read the paper and, Sanjeev's background note, that was very useful to me.
Okay. Vishal, you want to?
Yes, a couple of points just I want to raise. So one thing, when you suggested that we can have more empowerment to Rajya Sabha, that we have talked about, like that Rajya Sabha is not having any power to finance bill. But before moving to the finance bill, if you lose the majority in the Lok Sabha, even though you have a majority in the Rajya Sabha, it is not going to work. So your government will fall. So until and unless that you can't have the mechanism where that Rajya Sabha people can also empowered, or like can take participation in this one, like forming government or like saving government. So it is not going to work, like even though you empowered this Rajya Sabha, because if you lose the majority in the Lok Sabha, it's gone. So you don't have any power over there. So that is the one point, like when it comes to the Rajya Sabha. Second point, that whether that we can have the status quo. Yeah, we can have the status quo, and then we can move further and think. But interestingly, that when we worked on this finance commission, so where that we have a formula based thing, so maybe that we can think about it. So like increasing this the number or decreasing. So we can have this the population as a base, and then we can have, or we can devise a formula which can be accepted by everyone. So giving this the weightage to, say for example, like if the states are reducing their population, so you can give this the more weightage. So in a way that even though these states will lose, if say for example this the Kerala that you have said that 20 seats will be lost by these states. So maybe that if you give this the more weightage to this in this formula, so instead of 20, like they may lose like say 5 or 7, and then they can gain. So in a way that you can still have this the population as a base, and then you can devise the formula which can be applicable. Another thing that maybe, so as we have discussed, this migration is again one thing, but so when we have this the population, that it is based on like, okay, who is staying where, and when it comes to this the say population, even though if I'm staying in a Mumbai, so when this the question is asked like how many people that you have in house, so I say like this is the 10 people, so even this the 10 people are not living with me. So again that can be a misleading number. So based on this one, like I'm not very sure like how we can use this measure. So maybe that we have to think about some another formula which can consider all these issues, and then we can have a consensus. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
I want to add a few more points, Dr. Alam, and just to add, so I hope you will, in your final draft, mention, even if you don't go in that direction, about migration, because the reason I mentioned that is because there's been a lot of talk. I hope it's not serious, about allowing NRIs to vote, then allowing remote voting, internet-based voting. These are not fancy ideas, perhaps, so before they go any further, because the moment you do that, NRIs, then so surely migrants should have a right to vote. So I hope at least a couple of paragraphs should be, one nation, one election. You never know, NRIs will get 25 million will get voting rights. The other thing is that, since you said your preference or your proposed preferred solution is the negotiated settlement or a political negotiation, rather than simply applying the constitutional principle. So it would be nice to have in your draft what the politics will entail, because political negotiation will be about give and take, and what exactly are the stakes here? Is it just a perception issue, or are there some real? You said the spectacle of the smaller state having a visibility. That of course has importance, but it's more from a self-esteem point of view. But when you're talking about a political negotiation between states jostling for this, it's what exactly is the give and take? I mean, it's one thing to describe it as political, but what exactly are the things at stake? So, thank you.
Power shift.
Yeah.
Power shift from winning decisions in that list that are there, certain things followed by finances. So that what you were saying or he was saying, really let's become more federal in nature, which means that the states have greater power. So you can negotiate. Okay, I'll agree to losing 5, he getting 5 more seats. But then as a state, I need to decide certain things where I am sensitive about. Otherwise, the decision, well, I am worried about decisions that I may not
So
like.
let me just respond to your way. I understand, yes, but we should not be guided by the current political reality in Parliament. What Mr. Abhay Pethe is saying is that there are bills in Parliament which get brute majority voting, and they are passed without sometimes even discussions or debates, because the BJP got 70 out of 80 seats in Uttar Pradesh, 26 or 38 out of 38 in Gujarat, and some 90% seats in Bihar, but 0 seats in Kerala, 0 seats in Tamil Nadu, blah blah blah. So there, it seems as if there is a brute majority which is basically based on the north, but it may not be the reality in the coming years, that this distribution of seats across different political parties may be more uniform across states. In which case, it's not merely a north and south issue. It's right now. No, it is. It is what I'm trying to say that. No, it is. I know, but it is. It is not clear to me. It's not clear to me that the parliament is passing laws which are to the detriment of the smaller states. That's not clear to me. Only then the political give and take will come. But if the laws that are generally being discussed and debated and passed are in the general interest of the nation, then where is the political give and take? You know, what is this? Okay.
Sunil?
Just one or two more points. So what about women reservation? Because that 33% women reservation, if the numbers are frozen as on the present year, then the male members of parliament, they would be losing almost about 100 seats. 182 or so go the number, and the present number is 74 or so of women here. Here more or less, and it is a given that women reservation after this year will be done. Whether it will be done, whether we increase the number of seats or we freeze the number of seats, that has to happen because that amendment has come into force. So one way is, if you look at it from the gender perspective, then for political negotiations, how does it play out? And that affects all political parties, because right now there's no political party which has even 10% women karyakarta, so to say, who man their booths or who represent them in any way. So this issue will also need to be addressed, because as has been said, you have these 5,000 political families running, cutting across party lines, whose sons, daughters, wives, they will be given the party tickets on the issue of winnability. So this women representation also has the fear that it will devolve into something similar that we find in the local government elections. So this also somewhere will need to factor it in.
Any other points before? I have a few.
May I make a comment?
Please, please.
A quick comment.
Please.
I may have to be called away, and I don't want to miss this. This is a very helpful discussion, very enlightening in many ways. I should just quickly say a couple of things. First of all, I'm a big fan of local government, Panchayati Raj in India, but I don't think it can be very important in problem solving and representation for ordinary people, because in many states, state governments have not given the panchayats enough power to play that role. The complicated options that we're looking at are very stimulating, very intriguing, but because they are complicated, and because some of them require a redefinition of political representation, which is interesting to us as social scientists, but may not be interesting to politicians or voters. I wonder if the complications will mean that the people in power in New Delhi who make the decision on how to change things will in fact shun things that require, because of the complications. They will take a simple, straightforward way out. They will simply redistribute Lok Sabha seats according to the state level populations. Now the discussion so far suggests that you're not sure about that, because it would require negotiation, broad consensus, and give and take. These are all words that have been used. But will a decision on what to do next, will it really require negotiation, broad consensus, and give and take? Because many decisions in India in recent years have been rammed through without these things, as a mention of parliamentary process suggested. And I wonder if a ramming through of a simple redistribution of seats favoring northern states at the expense of the South if this would not be likely at a time when the ruling elite in New Delhi sees such a redistribution as politically convenient, politically advantageous to them, since they don't win many seats in the South. And despite what Professor Palshikar suggested earlier, I'm not sure they will begin winning many seats in the South. So I just wonder if the whole exercise might be pursued in this simplified and less than consensual way. Thank you.
Thank you. I have several suggestions and suggestion points to make, and maybe in this crowd of and intellectuals and academics, I'm the only only bureaucrat. So I'm going to be bold because bureaucrats usually otherwise.
You can't say that you are a bureaucrat either.
I have no problem admitting I'm a bureaucrat. So I think what's the purpose of this exercise is parliament election. But if parliament system is breaking down, I think we should also talk about how to strengthen parliament itself. So I think this bicameral issue of how to strengthen the second house, it should be also part of this exercise, because otherwise just arithmetic exercise, just increase number of MPs. It doesn't solve the problem. Today our system is broke. Our parliament is very weak vis-a-vis the government. And as long as that exists, it doesn't matter what formula you use. So how do we improve the parliamentary system? So that's the reason it becomes very important, strengthen Rajya Sabha and whole system of bicameral governance as an important part of India's improving democratic governance. So not only federalism, but also democratic governance is also, I think, we should perhaps think about. And I would suggest that at the same time we should think about how do we propose the strengthening of the second house in terms of governance of the systems. There's one point. Second, I see the present sort of system, how it has debilitated our development. Because of the way high weightage is given to the rural constituencies, today the parliament is not at all sensitive to urban issues. The entire India has become urbanized, but our governance system is totally out of line, out of sync. So it is, and that's another way of sort of, if you can improve the second house, you can bring more balance in terms of governance of this new India which is emerging, which is very different than when it was designed. And with all due respect to our freedom fighters and what they made, I think we have to now look at next 50 years. So I think let's be bold, maybe it will thrown out completely, but I think if your paper we want to make it, I think we should really make it something to also increase public awareness of the issues and what can be done. So that's my second point. Third is this issue of, in other words, what I'm saying is it could be sort of political education also we have to make. And I'm personally, in that sense, I'm attracted to the idea of the smaller states, because it has a lot of advantages, as I see it. So looking at the state units, or third tier, if the cities become very important player, then I think the whole thing changes. If cities are empowered, then I think again the governance structure changes. So I think there's very important issues involved here. How do I empower? Today, for instance, I live in Pune. Pune's governance is disgraceful for simple reason. Our Pune corporation of local bodies not adequately empowered. And somebody made a remark that if you want to improve your cities, you must have one of the city residents should be chief minister of your state. And this is what it is reduced to. So I think it's very important that city governance should be in our mind. And the other point, and it's a sort of typical undergraduate cute point, but the population when you're talking about, we really should take only voting population, a voters list, not a total population. Because that will change, mollify partly the issue, because then the numbers will look very differently. Given the demographic pattern which is emerging, you will find little more balance. So the voting population may make a little bit difference, mollify some of the, it will southern states may mollify them.
Because this every 5 years 100 million voters added in
So, so, so correcting for migration, correcting for voting population will make make a difference. So, and final point is that point you're making, which is very important, is we should look at this concurrent list issue. Today, the reason the center's power is increasing because of concurrent list, and that is a great source of angst amongst the states. So, I think it's very important. Take this opportunity to look at this issue also. Today, in the farm laws, for instance, debacle came only because of the concurrent list, and the central government tried to appropriate itself, and it became a disaster. So, yeah. So that's another issue I think should be highlighted in my view, because let's take this opportunity to bring out this, say, the delimitation as also one lever to make whether we can highlight some of the issues. But this concurrent list should be second look at it, bicameral governance system, and urban empowerment of urban cities, a third tier. This is changes, I think. Then your problem will come down in terms of north versus south or different regions, because really cities will be asking far more autonomy and agency, which they don't have today. And maybe that's one way of sort of squaring the circle, so to speak, of this dilemma. So just some of the points that I'll mention.
Just one more.
And finally, we can be afforded to be a little bold in our recommendation changes. I mean, because let it be sometimes thinkable, unthinkable, because thinkable once it's voiced and discussed. So one of the things that's, I mean, for instance, I'm just giving it because as I mentioned, when we first proposed in 2003 GST Council and GST, it was at that time unthinkable. People didn't think that, but government did come around. However faulty it is still, I think it was a major advance. And so it can become, this country can change if it is done. So we can try to think, which is unthinkable at this stage. But let's use this because our governance is broke. Our cities' governance is broke. Our systems are broke. So we can use this as a proverbial Archimedean lever to change the system, or at least start debate on this. It may be useful. That's all. Yeah.
So, can you also have a couple of paragraphs in your report on what if nothing is done, like what Professor Pethe said? It's not clear to me that if nothing is done, it's a terrible situation.
Urban system will collapse.
I know, so it will actually reflect on what Dr. Kelkar said. But it might be worthwhile to include in your report, because you said the choices between extreme constitutional principle application versus negotiated political settlement. But also a third thing, if nothing is done at all, you should establish in your paper that it's really a very bad, we cannot afford not to do anything.
So just one
please.
So since we are talking of delimitation, and it found mention in the constitution for both center as well as states. We are also agreed that now third tier is also part of the constitution. They have provided for state election commission, state finance commission. I think if a provision for setting up a delimitation commission for demarcating the boundaries of local governments in an objective manner based on certain administrative, financial and economic principles as well as on governance principles, and not leave it totally to state government departments and bodies to do it in whatever manner they deem fit, and then look upon it. If that gets inserted, yes, if it is the third tier in the constitution, you'll have that, but each state will set up a delimitation commission and the state assembly can accept it or reject it, but cannot amend it. If similar provision is made, then this question of rural-urban definition, which is totally arbitrary at the moment, and that's why you have peri-urban areas continue to be rural. So all these issues can then possibly get resolved. So this may be also something which we can consider.
Is it not done by the state election commissioner all the time?
No.
They do it.
It's done by the departments. Maybe in Maharashtra, but in other states
It's done by state election.
no. This I can tell you with 100% certainty that in lot of states, it's the department concerned. If it is the Panchayati Raj department or
Maharashtra, I'm sure, and you're right, both of us are right, because it's a risk. Local body elections have not happened for 4 years. All 26 corporations, municipal corporations, and are being run by administrative IAS officers. So the former State Election Commissioner and also former Chief Secretary of the state has gone to Supreme Court. We are partnering that. This is a very serious issue. So there is a gap. The Constitution of India says you have to conduct elections before the 5-year term is over. But the Constitution of India says the State Election Commissioner is on par with the Chief Election Commissioner of India. There is no difference. But in the public eye and the media, there is disproportionate importance to the MLA and MP election. But there is a gap in the law which says that the Constitution of India also says that the state election laws will be formed by the state government. And therefore, this 5-year limit is not a constitutional violation as such. So this is a gap which has gone to Supreme Court. But that's where I learned that the state government forms the law, states form the law regarding delimitation. So in Maharashtra, it's the State Election Commission who is doing it all the time. And there's been improvement because they use Google Maps, they use some objective criteria like you suggested.
Yeah,
but not across India.
But in most other states, it's the department. And the general practice is that before the 5-year term is over, the minister will say so many years in these MLA constituencies, these will need to be brought inside an urban area, made into a town area or municipality, or it should remain a rural area, no matter whether it is whatever criteria is being fulfilled or not. That arbitrariness has to go. And that can only go if there in Article 243 or wherever we need to make such provision. Because we are talking of delimitation.
And this we can be used it, what he's saying, we can use it.
I'm sorry, but I don't think any state has any best practice as such. Even Maharashtra government. In fact, Maharashtra government has been the most political and cynical about it over the last 5 years. They are practically gerrymandering it in terms of ward composition in urban locations as well. And the situation is that the State Election Commission would be then subsequently asked to simply delimit the constituencies. Their job is very limited. And thirdly, in performing their job, you are right, they would have to depend upon the state administration because they obviously don't have the paraphernalia to actually delimit with Google Maps and in spite of Google Map and everything else. So I think that's a very valid point, and I don't know if there are any best practices that has been violated. Entire spirit of having State Election Commission or State Finance Commission for that matter, both have been completely violated across the country.
One minor thing, not a really a new point, something
decide what is
underlying.
final, because then I can say that this is our final response.
No, minor. I said minor point, which is actually underlining what Dr. Kelkar talked about, which is to do with the, when we talk of good governance, then he talked of systems failure, this, that, and the other. And then in other dialogues that we keep on having, so this is a bit parallel, so please allow me that leeway. In urban governance and other things and so on. The other day somebody said, which was in a sense obvious after he said it, one expert, he said, we keep on talking of good governance and delivery and this and that. And we always approach it from the supply side. A point that we have been discussing of late also. How do you improve capacity? How do you reduce transaction costs and protocols and all that? But we are a participatory democracy, right? So somewhere there has to be a pressure, and the maturity of the polity must be such that there must be demand for good governance. So the demand for this kind of delimitation leading to certain good practices otherwise starts becoming an intellectual kind of a problem. which we, some wise people sitting, wise or not so wise people sitting across the table, the people, are they really concerned? And if not, they should be concerned with these things. It's a long kind of a whole thing of trying to create awareness and creating lobbies through a various partitioning that our society has and partisan politics that we are playing currently. But I think despite all that, some effort has to go towards that, because if the pressure comes, otherwise it will be at a very superficial level where people will be discussing, अरे हमारा 4 सीट जाएगा, उसका ये होगा and all that. If it is really going to affect the good governance and people are going to demand it, as they should be through indirectly through their representatives, I don't think they do currently. So the point I'm trying to make is what you made, which is this whole business of getting the systems working. To put it cynically, somebody says, who the hell cares? The general public doesn't seem to care. Otherwise, as somebody, a foreign friend of mine said, Mumbai, when he was visiting, he said, everything is breaking down. Things are not working. I'm surprised people are not on the street shouting. So have we every day? And have we gone to some completely desensitized or have accepted this in a fatalistic thing? It should not be. So I think that needs to be flagged somewhere, that ultimately demand for good governance and good institutional structures, then on the basis of that, all these things of numbers and representations in parliament, etc., who will lead to good outcomes ultimately for citizens, starts getting real weight and leverage.
I think the basket is full of suggestion. At the same time, I find some comments not so relevant to our exercise. For example, women's reservation. Women's reservation will happen within the state. It has nothing to do with the representation of a state in the Lok Sabha. So, and how we can factor it in this exercise, I'm unable to, get it. And
It is linked to delimitation.
within the state, delimitation commission
So
will determine that this constituency should be reserved for, women, as it is done for SC and ST.
So delimitation commission will need to be formed, and it will need to take a
Whenever
step on that.
whenever delimitation takes place, there is an independent, maybe so-called independent delimitation commission, as per the provision of the constitution. So delimitation commission within the state will determine that this or that constituency will be reserved for women. So it has nothing to do with the distribution of seats across states. Okay. The other thing on splitting of larger states, I'm not sure that it is going to help the problem, because within the state there are different regions, different demographic regimes. Certain parts of a state is more dense than other parts. For example, the separation of Jharkhand from Bihar, has not does not seem to have resolved this issue. And small is always not beautiful. If it was the case, Jharkhand would have been, one of the richest state, but it is not. On various parameters of development, Jharkhand is still below Bihar. So we have to think about that. When we talk about representation, we are not talking about whether representation is, linked to, empowerment of citizens, the way we think about it. At one level, we think that representation, the representatives the primary function of legislators is to make legislation. And through those legislation, they might be able to, empower the citizens. So with the link to this is the idea of, constituency service, which is also a misleading, notion. That's why at the theoretical level, it sounds plausible that lower the PRR, population to representative ratio, the representatives will be better able to, address the complaints of, their constituents. But it doesn't seem to be the case. Whether it is too low or it is too high, it not going to make any difference. And I haven't come across any empirical studies that have shown that actually lower PRR leads to better service to the citizens. So at the theoretical level, it sounds good. So we are not making the case that if the PRR is very large, in our case, it is affecting adversely the welfare of the citizens. Yeah, about the public awareness about delimitation. In the last delimitation, there were public meetings, I think for the first time in the history of delimitation in India. At the local level, I found people, quite aware of, what is going to happen. So when constituency boundaries are demarcated, people, seriously think about it, whether I will be part of this constituency or the neighboring constituency. Or if, I am going to put up in the next, the neighboring constituency, and there is a physical barriers such as river or hill or something else, then I won't be able to, approach my representative. So actually they put up petitions before the public commission that you need to actually revise the delimitation plan. And I think this need to be, this exercise, needs to be more intense, because we still need people to be more educated about the impact of delimitation on the representation and their betterment. About voting population, the problem, I think the problem with voting population or voters list is more than the misleading notion of population itself, because this controversy is going on that overnight one household gets 30 more electors. How it happened overnight. So this is a whole business will get murkier and murkier. So that is also, I don't think it is going to solve the problem. Whatever, even if the notion of population is, can be questioned by anybody, but I think that population, the term population is better than this one. Okay, voting population. We have been arguing for quite long that, like in many countries, the three maps of representation, the Lok Sabha, the state assemblies, and the 30 years should be aligned in such a way that the whole number of 30-year constituency make up an assembly constituency, and assembly constituencies make up parliamentary constituency. If the boundaries of these three maps are aligned, I think that would be better. For that, the jurisdiction of the delimitation commission will have to be enhanced, because at this state level we don't have any delimitation commission. When panchayat level election comes around, what happens is that this constituency has to be reserved for OBC or SC or ST or woman, nothing else happens. And which areas should go to which constituency, it is done arbitrarily. So if this task also be given to the delimitation commission, I think it is not impossible to do. but decision has to be taken in this regard. On the migration issue, I think it's important, but it is very complicated. I don't know, how to factor this in our exercise, but we will certainly look at it and the political negotiation. So I am a geographer working with political scientists. So I think this question will be answered by political scientists themselves.
I thought you masquerade also as a political scientist.
Something he said very quickly. Before you. Okay, with the smaller states thing that you said, I have a slightly different take. You see, when you carve out smaller states, normally there is an underlying political reason for that. Nobody does that purely from geography or point of view and so on. My question is that if we have a problem with 3 players, then creating 30 players will be better because it creates more complications and confusion, but the resulting solution is simpler than having 3 very kind of powerful players that are there. Now, if the point is that even when you carve out these smaller things out of the identity of these smaller players will continue to be aligned with the parental so-called state, then of course it will not matter. I doubt if that will happen. So that is the only minimum point, but that's an aside and almost an intellectual plaything. Okay, whether a problem with 3 entrenched kind of power blocks, is that problem simpler to solve than with 30 people? I would think 30 is more because a confused kind of a situation always leads to easier solutions.
Can I
Just a quick response. For example, if I am not happy with my 2 sons, should I think of a 3rd son, so as to manage the affair of the family?
If you can do so, you do it.
If you can manage with 3 sons, go ahead and do it. It's your problem.
The advantage of also, I think, of smaller states would be it will certainly improve the governance delivery system,
Yeah,
and
but
the reflection
definition
of the it also answers part of your problem. It will improve demand for governance.
Yeah.
So the demand side was certainly much better if the more smaller units. I'm just sort of hypothesizing.
Especially if it comes out of people's movement
Yeah,
which
exactly.
calls for smaller
Yeah,
government. There is that awareness. So once they get that identity and demand for better delivery might be there. It's just a hope. We are just clutching at straws, I guess. But
So 2 comments actually, very good summary that you did. 2 comments. One is this smaller states, same, more points in what Professor Pethe is saying. What tends to happen is, as it is the life of a citizen, so this is beyond our discussion on delimitation, but the life of a citizen is affected more by day-to-day things, whether it's roads or traffic or sewage, which are actually, according to the Constitution, now they're the domain of the local government, but local governments have not been empowered de facto. But when the state is smaller, the distance of the citizen to the so-called state government is smaller. So in some ways, hopefully the governance can improve. But you're right, you get counter examples.
That is
But
the idea
even
linked
then-
with constituency service.
Even then, we have to not give up on that.
Sure.
I mean, even Dr. Ambedkar had said about breaking up UP into 4. So
Yeah.
that's one point. But the other point is very, very interesting and important that you made, that it's not clear, especially if you really believe in the constitutional separation, that the constituency services
Sure.
really are the domain of the local governments. And the parliament representatives are supposed to do legislations and lawmakers.
That will have wider effect.
Lawmakers.
on the
So
law.
it is not clear that this connection between representativeness, do they really collectively represent the will of the people from that geography, and does that make them better lawmakers? So that's a very important point, and I mean, actually, it goes to the heart of the matter again, where we are saying strengthening the local governments. That Parliament, what should I say? The Parliament's the relevance of Parliament being truly representative in terms of geography is somewhat, attenuated. If you really separate these 3 tiers, that the constituency services should be the domain of the lower governments, and the top level guys should be doing. So that's why, for example, in the US Congress, the word Congress refers to both the houses, Senate and Congress. Sometimes the lower house is called Congress, but both the houses together also are Congress. They are like 80-90% of their lawyer by training. If you look at their educational background, they tend to be lawyers. They are lawmakers. Whereas representatives don't have to be only lawyers.
And sir, just one point, sir, ki apart from democracy and federalism, can separation of powers, which was hinted at, be also something that we need to sort of factor it in conceptually when we are talking of these 3 tiers of government? Because that mixing up, and as sir was mentioning, ki legislature abdicating or being controlled by executive, somewhere that is also becoming an issue.
Since I see that there is some time, if you permit,
Of
sir,
course,
please.
to, again, not directly
Can I
related.
first just respond to the earlier set of questions, because then
No, we want to listen to you. I want to listen to you at the end as the final word. You are
No, there is no-
mercy. I am just saying these are giving you a comic interest. Oh yeah, sorry. So one of my friends, Saskia Sassen, wrote somewhere, and this refers to what Dr. Kelkar was talking about, urban and so on. She says that in the modern world, including, and she was talking in India, in Mumbai and so on, said the concept of nation state has reached a tipping point. It's no longer very relevant because of the kind of capital flows that are happening and hitting the cities without going through Delhi and so on and so forth. So maybe that then starts, maybe a little bit of rethinking about the whole idea of this business of yeah. And the second is a bit of an anecdote, which is what leads me. I was meeting with a member of parliament, and Murli Devra's son, and Milin, and I'd gone to his office for some work with the university, and he was walking me out, and he said, sir, hey Bhagat, there are these people who are sitting there, that old lady, this. You know why she has come here? For some connection of gas or water. Now, if I were to tell her that I am a member of parliament, it is not my job to do it. She'll go away thinking that I am of no use. Whereas if I called up somebody locally and said, "Inka kaam kar do," she'll say, "He's a great representative and she'll vote for me." This is the level of maturity that we have. So that maturing of polity, which is linked to the demand of good governance and all of that, which will lead, it will take time, and therefore maybe we could kick the bucket down the line a little bit.
No, but I disagree, because this is two-way street. Senapati powered mark traffic jam. Modi ko attack karo Twitter pe. Mr. Modi, what is traffic? This goes both ways. You can't say political immaturity of the voters, but the centralization and this it is sort of a two-way thing. It's reinforcing this thing. Yes. So it's both ways.
Sir, can I add?
Now you're the last point.
Okay, sir. So, whole debate of this delimitation. So, when we have this, the one nation, and we are voting for this, the parliament, and when we are talking about the state representative, so can we? It's a just radical thought. So, instead of having this, the state, this one. So, if you take this, the population as a measure, and then you start with this, the 1 point, and then you start drawing this, the circles. Say, for example, like there's the population of say 3 lakhs or like whatever it is, and then you start creating, because for example in a Pune, I come from, so my constituency for this the Lok Sabha is ruler, which is Baramati, where I live in Pune. So it doesn't make any sense to me. But if you start like drawing the circles or like boundaries, so even like for example, this is the Maharashtra and Gujarat border. So maybe that few constituencies will jointly come in both states. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah.
Just create such a mess and let the
Yeah.
identity go for a toss.
Yeah.
Anyway, that is too.
It's a just radical thought, but
No, not really. But my response is more or less informed by a split sentiment. I would be on board with many of these ideas and suggestions intellectually, but looking at the political system as such, I would be extremely wary of undertaking much of what has been said over the last 45 minutes or 1 hour, because if we take into account all of the key things that are said and then tie them up to a better delimitation process, it would amount to practically reworking the entire political structure. That is to say, reworking the constitution in its entirety. My suggestion therefore would be to see to it in two respects. One, practicability, feasibility, and second, keeping things minimal in terms of the churning or upheaval that they would produce. That is because already as a polity, we are at a point when there is a lot of churning and deeply adversarial partisanship that informs that churning. At such time, there is very limited scope for intellectual interventions to rework the existing system as such. In more quiet terms, quieter socio-political environments, an intellectual intervention about how to rework our structures would have been most welcome. What happens in India, however, is that reworking of the structures, reworking of the constitutional principles, and reframing of the democratic idea are three interconnected, overlapping things that are getting confused at the moment. So any suggestion for reworking of the structure would immediately have repercussions on the remaining two, the reworking of constitutional principles and reworking of the idea of democracy. They would get affected by these. This paper was therefore prepared under a deep sense of stress that you cannot go to a purely intellectual level in framing a proposal, because proposals that have a public context cannot be only isolated in an intellectual manner. What satisfies me or somebody intellectually and convinces me or somebody as having a very democratic basis can actually involve a lot of cross currents in actual politics. So that's the larger context in which I am looking at the proposals that have come up over the last 45 minutes or so. But still more specifically, for example, looking at one of the most evocative point that came up was about the size of the states, because in a sense that directly connects to the question of delimitation. What happens that if you don't have 140 seats for UP but 30 seats each for 4 UPs, Uttarachal and not Uttarachal, what is it? Purvanchal and so on and so forth, Bundelkhand and so on and so forth. True, very attractive. However, that cannot be isolated from the process in which states have been historically formed in India in the first place. And if you look at India's political processes, you will find that they are less informed by absolute or abstract principles and more by compromises between principles and practices. Whether we should have large states is an intellectual debate, whereas whether we should have Kungu Nadu from Tamil Nadu taken away is a political process, and that process is connected to the politics of DMK and AIDMK. Whether we should have outer Manipur taken away from Manipur is not an intellectual question. It is a question related to the entire equations or equilibria among the Kukis, the Maitis and the Nagas, and then the question of Burmese coming into India, etc., etc. Even as intellectual principle, linguistic state was never a principle exclusively. Otherwise, we couldn't have many more states speaking the same language. As Ambedkar put it, even at that time before his death, we could have many states speaking the same language. So, linguistic state was not the only principle. Today, therefore, we cannot set off a process of state having only small size. We could also have to take into account various possibilities of political forces being unleashed because of that demand. The same is true about the suggestions, for example, about Rajya Sabha. Though we have ourselves stepped into that landmine, giving more powers to the Rajya Sabha would simply mean that we entirely redefine the structure of India's legislative system, and therefore that would be only our second preference. As far as I am concerned, that would be our second preference only. Intellectually, while I would agree with most of the proposals therefore that have come up here, except probably the geography proposal, which actually reflects, and that is like a red flag to a bull, because that reflects one nation, one election proposal. So I would be immediately sort of fighting against it. I would reiterate that therefore the two things that I said at the conclusion of the early, presentation would probably be the basis on which this can be finalized, this proposal or draft can be finalized. One is, there cannot be an absolute logical solution to the dilemmas and tensions that the question of delimitation throws up. The only solution that can be workable is something that would come up as a negotiated settlement, not among states but between north and south also, because the way it is now being posited, at least by southern states, is that it is not a question of only Tamil Nadu or Kerala, it is a north versus south. And this entire discourse, therefore, whether India belongs to south, whether the northerners are Aryans, then enters into the discourse about what constitutes India, and therefore a negotiated settlement will be required. The second basis that I sort of mentioned at the concluding statement was that it is the political parties that have to come up with a solution. We as citizens can intervene into the ways in which parties think. We can therefore push parties, but while pushing parties, I would rather push those parties to compromise rather than push them on questions of principle, because questions of principle can still be different. As we point out in our paper, there can still be a very valid case for equality of votes. There could still be, and you were initially trying to sort of tease it out from us as to what is wrong with it, and absolutely nothing wrong. In fact, in all the proposals that come up, there would always be a legitimate grievance as far as the states of north are concerned. So contrary to what is generally believed that the states of south are losing, it is the states of north that would be losing in a sense if one goes merely by the constitutional principle of equality of votes. And that is where this overlapping of negotiations and political parties being major players would come into the picture. Unfortunately, and that is where the dilemma of finalizing the draft paper would come up. The provision is that after the census that takes place after 2026, a new delimitation commission will have to be appointed. And we just don't know, as we were discussing in the morning, whether the upcoming census pending from 2021 takes place in 26. If it takes if it takes place in 26, then the government of India would be within its right to then say that we appoint a new delimitation commission on the basis of 2026 census, because it has happened after 26 technically speaking. And then this question of what stand different political parties take on the question of delimitation would become a political question. Already, though it sounds comic to us outsiders of the political game, including Chandrababu Naidu, this point has been taken up by states of South India. And again, for us, logically speaking, it is easy to argue A, that southern states are not losing, and or B, that what if you lose? After all, the parliament, as all of us have said, doesn't have much to do these days. The executive anyway rams through everything. That argument is well taken, and yet politically for the next 2-3 years, the central argument in India would be loss of southern states and therefore an imbalance between south and north, and that is where the questions of financial resource allocation would re-enter by the back door, because questions of financial reallocation cannot take place in the public domain as evocative political issues. This would be a proxy for that, and that is the larger political context in which the entire exercise of delimitation has to be approached. So I don't know whether a policy paper should take up only an abstract intellectual position or marry with pragmatic politics and look at what are the possibilities of actually resolving the delimitation issue. Among the other suggestions, I thought that this interstate council, Professor Balveer Arora was suggesting it, would be an excellent idea to revive, because in the first place institutions have become dormant, but to revive the interstate council, then to dump it into its lap, the entire problem, and then wait for interstate council, because then it becomes a negotiating counter. That is where the chief ministers or representatives of the states sit and discuss. I think there was incidentally one or two things that I would take issue with. India was never a federal state system originally. That is an outdated understanding of political scientists in India like us, who in the 50s and 60s echoed their Western counterparts, saying that India is not a truly federal system. The contemporary understanding of the original constitution of India is that it was a pragmatic federalism, and therefore the term that is more commonly used these days is asymmetric federalism. And that asymmetry is not only across states, that asymmetry is also between center and the states. And that is exactly what Dr. Ambedkar said in the Constituent Assembly, that it turns into a central system or centralized system sometimes, and otherwise states have their place. And increasingly since the 1970s onwards, that federalization process, both constitutionally and politically, has become stronger. And therefore, even if whatever were the original constitutional provision, today to ignore the current relevance of federalization principle would not be enough to appreciate what different states are saying. Then there was a technical question, Professor Pethe, that you asked. I don't know the answer. We need to find out. So far as practicable, I think there is an slight opening of the door, that all the compromises that we make are because so far as practicable. Just as you said that you vote in Baramati, because delimitation says that just as far as practicable, it would be within the same geographical unit or urban rural unit. But there are places where even different assembly constituencies are split into two different districts currently, like in Raigad and so on and so forth. So, I think so far as practicable could be a very useful key for decision makers to make allowances for various compromises and concessions. I think I would stop here because there is no need to really sort of respond to every point made by you. We will try and accommodate some of these issues. Professor Sanjeer Alam has already taken up some of these issues. About migrants, I am still not sure how to incorporate that in the larger structure of the argument. And about voting population, the answer has already been given, that in a sense voting population is self-reported, whereas actual population is enumerated by the authority of the state, so-called authority of the state. It is a census where I am either enumerated or not enumerated, and therefore there might be ticklish issues, particularly with the controversies over electoral rolls being revisioned frequently. That issue would still remain very volatile. And the bottom line, of course, is that in spite of all these precautions, the proposal that we may come up with, or the PIC might agree with, etc., and all of us collectively might agree with, would be entirely redundant or irrelevant if the current thinking in the country is otherwise. We don't know what and how it will happen, but the word that Jim Manor used was things are rammed, and he was too polite in saying things are rammed. They are simply rammed through your throats. So if one nation, one election can come, which is most likely to come, then any discussion of delimitation and how nicely negotiated delimitation should be can become, in a sense, a cry in a vacuum. Our effort collectively just should be to intervene in the public debate before the issue is politically vitiated. It is already getting vitiated, and let us try to make it as less vicious as possible. So that would be my sort of suggestion. Thank you.
Only one point I would invite you attention, and I would reiterate, you may like to think about it, is that delimitation is one area in which, by which you can really bring this current bias against urban issues, current governance. So that we should think about it, because the
Sanjeer Bhai should have the data, or maybe he can share it later, about how many constituencies are now either fully or 75% urban. Although the data would be slightly dated because it is based on 2011 census. 2001 census. But based on that, my rough recollection is that that has already been taken care of, because already many more constituencies, like in Maharashtra, at least 50% of the constituencies are urban, as far as the assembly is concerned. Not 50, little less, whereas our projection would be Maharashtra is 55% urban now. So that probably would be taken care of in any delimitation exercise. But the trouble is that if you have 20 lakh as the unit per constituency, then there would be a bias in favor of the non-urban. That is, you are right there. And I think I forgot to mention this, two things. Professor Pethe said, what if nothing is done? I mean, you probably mentioned it in the sense that if it is frozen as at present, my hunch is that that will happen, because the best solution is to just keep it like that and postpone it. And the second point was about provision of delimitation along with local bodies, which would be a larger thing. But yes, I think we can accommodate that in the discussion of the possibilities as far as the scope of delimitation is concerned. Yeah. But anyway, as I said, there is no point in sort of listing out every single proposal and responding to it, because we agree with I hope Sanjeer also agrees, we agree with the spirit in which those proposals were made. As I said, my only split response is that while agreeing with the spirit, I am rather cynical as far as a student of politics.
That way I totally respect your cynicism.
I think on the first, I would say that that is exactly what I meant when I was talking of politics. While you or I may agree or disagree with the idea, the stakes for the North would be to ensure that their financial resources should be protected. And the best way to protect those would be to ask the center to push for either freezing or a compromise in which southern states feel sort of placated. Once they feel placated, this status quo on the other part, that is financial allocation, can be pushed. And that is how politics would play out. That's my sense. Yes. I mean, if one were to sort of get into, which I and you both don't do, if one were to get into a game theoretic model, I think that is exactly how it would play out. On the unintended consequences, I am not thinking of those, but yes, that is what I meant when I said that BJP, it is wrong to assume that BJP would be opposed to status quo because it is a North Indian party. I think the unintended consequences shown, for example, by 2024 elections is that BJP can lose in UP and BJP can gain elsewhere. And that is why we shouldn't expect BJP or any party, but particularly a party like BJP, a very smart party like BJP, to simply go by one electoral result and to say that therefore we are anti-South. The BJP, the last thing BJP would want at this point would be this label that they are anti-South. That is exactly what Professor Ujjwal is saying, that a backdoor assurance to the poorer states, which also happen to be more populous, that their financial interests would be protected. Therefore, they don't make any complaints, they don't make any noise about either the South gaining a little bit or just retaining the status quo. Now, while he said rightly that in principle continuing with status quo is not a good thing, I suspect that that will happen temporarily because the cusp at which we are in terms of political economy, the states of North India wouldn't like to lose in terms of financial resource allocation. For them that would be more important than anything. Though nobody would say this upfront, of course, that wouldn't happen like a kind of marketplace negotiation. It would happen only backdoor. And that's why interstate council as the place where these discussions take place can be a very good idea. Thanks, Ujjwal.
Very quickly, clarificatory, which is not part of this. One is, if you do consider, etc., am I right in thinking that if I am a migrant, and there is complication in defining that, etc., but forget all that, am I required or am I able to register as a voter, or can I continue to? So suppose I make a change mandatorily and say that if I am a migrant, however defined, because there are different problems, and if it made compulsory that if you are a migrant, you better vote from where you are now, meaning you have migrated to. Will that make a difference to the argument? I am not clear, I have not worked it out, but after all the complications, the second clarificator thing is, you said that post 26 census, now it means announcement of setting up of census, or because even now anytime they start census, the results and so on are not going to be before 26. But will that matter technically? Suppose the government were to announce in 25, they were beginning the census. Will technically that count when you are saying that, or do you wait for 10 more years or 7 years, after which would be a preferred solution in kicking down the bucket? So what is your understanding? Is it technically, if the results start coming in of the census after 26, does it matter? No.
As the provision that Sanjeer read out says, the census after 2026.
Meaning announced.
Obviously, the assumption then was it is a decennial census which will take place in 2031. Having that cycle broken now, if the government simply slightly delays and then announces it and technically calls it the census 2026, because the preparation will take place and it will take 3-4 months, and then the actual census will begin. So if it begins, let us say, just as we call the elections of 1952, which actually began in 51, ended in 52, they are called elections of 1952. And because there is no clarity on this, either you go to a court fighting on this, or you accept the government version that it is the census of 26. But practically you are right, because even then the 26 census data will not be available to the Delimitation Commission by December 26 or even December 27 for that matter.
Yes.
So, yes, I agree with your phrase of kicking the bucket down, that everything would get postponed. And that again sort of fits into the situation of not doing much right now. On registration of voters, again there is this ambiguity, because I as a voter register where I am voting, residing and voting. For that there is routine clearing of voting lists. That is to say, if somebody goes to my native place, finds out that I am not staying there, strikes out my name, then I cease to be a voter there. But as it happens, migrants, particularly those who work temporarily somewhere, always prefer to keep their names in the original place of their residence. And that is a mythical place. Original place of residence is a mythical place. That's why there is so much complication about registration of migrants, either double registration or non-registration, and their ability to actually vote at the time of election.
And in fact, sir, here this one nation, one ration card, which was technically trying to sort out this problem of migrant labor, how successful it has been, that would also be, I don't think it has been very successful. And now they have brought in that this electoral voter list will be done not once a year, but several times during every quarter or so. And this talk of one electoral roll for both parliament, assembly and local body elections, that was the thinking. Now with all this digitization and it should be possible to automatically sort of, and now when they are linking it up with birth and death registration and all those things. So technically, people at the highest level, they are given the impression that technologically it is possible to do everything in a centralized manner. How effectively?
Yes, we don't know.
What end? That is a different story.
Forget one nation card. And it will come to that. But currently it is not national. You see, I mean, personally, they just removed me from the electoral roll in Bombay as I was here. So it became very easy for me to register myself in Pune. So I have done that. My wife, who continues to be a voter in Mumbai, so she goes on there and votes. I vote here now. And for some reason, my name was just dropped when I was staying in the university. And I tried everything, missing, not found, dead, everything. All this I tried. Nowhere was I there. So I said, छोड़ो अभी क्या करेंगे इधर आके I was easily able to do it. So it's not just that about migrants. I mean, I don't know.
Anyone who moves one from one place to
But I had not moved. But they removed me from the voting list, no. And which I didn't care.
In terms of Northeastern going up, because the demographic pattern is such that it will not make that much difference.
That is today, sir. That is because today the demographic. But after a few years, they will all become voters. No?
True. But at least transition problem is solved.
Again, permission from chairman. So please allow me. I will need to leave for another.
Because you said we are going to end also. Don't worry. You're not
I don't want to break up the
conversation.
but we'll catch up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See.
Wonderful session. Thank you. You are staying.
If there is no other further comment, you didn't speak at all. No comment. So Any Dr. Arora or our
He is not there. I
Oh,
think only Ujjwal is there.
Professor, you have any point before we wind up?
Yes, sir. This is,
Okay.
that was very nice session, very important session, sir.
Ujjwal, have you read the draft?
That's the teacher's question, you know.
नहीं नहीं कभी तो पढ़ लीजिए ना थोड़ी मदद कीजिए हमारी.
It will be great if you can have a chance to go through and send a comment so that it can be brought out. So,
Bye.
what remains me is to really thank once again our distinguished Professor Palshikar and his colleague Alam Sahab for writing this paper. I think it's a very important paper, important issue, and it's fitness of things that we start the ball rolling at least in terms of intellectual understanding of the issue. So we give you full freedom to write this paper as you want, and that's how we'll bring it out. We respect your all judgments be respected. And as soon as I don't know, is there any timeline you can suggest when we'll bring out a revised paper?
Okay.
So end of March?
Yeah.
End of March is okay? That is good enough because thank you very much.